Arnold joins us right now, the National Taxpayers Union Vice President. Brandon, this is kind of an outside the ballpark question for you, but does it matter to your organization who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve?
Yeah, it absolutely matters. I mean, monetary policy and fiscal policy are very much linked closely together. And the policies that we see coming out of the Fed with regard to, the bond and securities purchasing is having an impact on the broader economy, on inflation, on employment, and so forth. So these policies are linked together. While we focus primarily on fiscal policy, taxes and spending and so forth, it's impossible to completely disassociate the two. And on that note, I think Powell has had a pretty steady hand. There's certainly areas that we can express some disagreement over, but we've had a pretty steady hand at the helm, and I don't see a real reason to change course right now, especially if the differences that we have with Powell are over environmental policy or social justice, things that are completely outside the Fed's purview.
Normally it was an exception when President Trump didn't reappoint Janet Yellen as the Fed chair. Oftentimes, presidents, even of a different party, reappoint the existing Fed chair, unless it's a disaster going on, as Jimmy Carter had to deal with when he appointed Paul Volcker. That helped the country. It didn't help his reelection prospects. But what do you make of the environment we're in, where the Federal Reserve, has trillions of dollars worth of assets on its books, and the big drama is how and when it's going to slow that down, and Congress is spending like money's going out of style? That's not a great combination.
It's not a great combination. And of course, we were in extraordinary circumstances. We still are to some extent with COVID.
Absolutely.
So we've been a lot more tolerant of spending, of government interference in the economy than we typically would be. But now we're almost over that hump. We're almost back to normal. And it's time to revert to a restrained Congress, to a restrained president, to the extent that we've ever had one. So the very notion that we're talking about spending $3.5 trillion is just lunacy. We just spent $2 trillion earlier this year, a few months ago. And the effects of that are actually very negative in a lot of ways when we're seeing these inflationary pressures. It's impossible to buy a used car right now. If you want to even buy something simple like a carton of milk, it's extraordinarily more expensive than it used to be. So these policies have repercussions for everyday Americans. And instead of spending billions of dollars on the civilian climate corps or millions and millions of dollars on desert fish conservation, maybe it's time to rein it back a little bit and focus on things that actually matter to Americans, which is getting back to work, getting back to school, and getting back to the economy that we had back in 2019.
Real quickly, before I let you go, Brandon, many have argued that the president's sort of damaged goods, certainly in polls and everything, post this, pretty disastrous Afghan pullout. And it's going to affect his ability to get that $3.5 trillion human infrastructure plan through. But the flip side is that means the tax hikes won't go through, or at least be delayed. Are you of that opinion that that is very much in doubt? In other words, both the big spending plan and the tax hikes to pay for it, presumably, delayed and possibly not happening?
I think it's very much a possibility that this entire deal collapses. And I liken it to a ship. It's the last ship leaving the harbor for this Democratic Congress and Democratic president with a unified Congress and unified government. And the more they see that as the case, the more they see this as the last ship leaving the harbor, the more they want to keep throwing one thing after another on it to make it, to get their pet projects passed and enacted into law. But of course, that weight has problems with it because it's sinking down the boat. And if they keep sinking it down, it might not float anymore. So I do think there's a chance that this thing may fall apart. The tax increases, they've already walked them back a little bit. It looks like instead of fully paying for the $3.5 trillion in spending with tax increases, they're going to borrow up to $1.7 trillion. So again, that's going to increase inflation. That's going to make the problems that we're currently experiencing much, much worse. So I think this thing could get worse before it gets better, but I am hopeful that it could be defeated in Congress as we're seeing more moderates raise some objections.
All right. We're still a long way from any conclusive kind of signal there, but Brandon Arnold, great seeing you again. One of the arguments has been raised for a strong month in the markets that you've been seeing today, notwithstanding, is growing optimism that those tax hikes have been stymied. A little more to this.